Greetings to all lovers of tales, myths, and legends. Today, we will talk about a quite famous character. Well, who among you hasn't heard of the renowned Irish Banshee? And you might think, what is there to say about her? Everything is already clear. However, if we dig deeper, there's much more to tell about her. So, get comfortable and prepare to embark on a journey straight to Ireland, where in the remotest places, the belief in the harbinger of death, the Banshee, may still linger. Now, imagine that you somehow find yourself as a guest, let's say, at an Irish farmer's house, and not just anywhere but in a truly remote village that regards civilization skeptically. How does that sound? Great! Now, you need to make sure you haven't stumbled upon some sectarians who might want to sacrifice you to their gods. It's a remote village after all. Ignoring civilization is a serious warning sign that makes you think. Well, anyway, it's up to you to decide. Now, picture a twilight autumn evening and yourself playing with the farmer's dog near the house. Quite a relaxing atmosphere, isn't it? But suddenly, somewhere near the neighboring fence, a strange inhuman wail is heard. The dog starts cowering at your feet, and fear takes hold of your soul, with only one thought spinning in your mind: where should I run? Suddenly, the door creaks right behind you, making you even more frightened. However, it's just the host who is taking you in. He looks gloomily towards the neighbor's house and mutters something to himself, then looks at you and says, "Don't be afraid, buddy, it's just the Banshee." Looks like old O'Driscoll is in a bad state. It's a shame, he was a good man. You calm down a little and ask the question that's been on the tip of your tongue: who is this Banshee, then? "Well, mate," the man answers, "sit down, I'll tell you all about it." You sit down on a stump by the fence and listen to a rather intriguing story. So, here's the thing, the storyteller begins, scratching his beard. When it's time for one of us true Irish folks to die, a woman appears near our house. Not exactly old, not exactly young. And she starts wailing inconsolably, just like now. It's unclear whether it's a scream or a cry, but it instills a terrible dread in people and animals. You see, this woman is not from our world, but from another one where none of us are in a hurry to go. So, the person whom the Banshee cries for will die the next day or within a few hours. Seems like old O'Driscoll's turn has come now. Well, I guess I'll go and say goodbye to him. As for you, go inside, it's getting dark, who knows what might happen. You go inside the guest house and go to sleep, and the next day, it turns out that this very O'Driscoll has indeed passed away. Such is the plot of about every other Banshee story. But who is she exactly? Let's figure it out. Let's start with the fact that the Banshee is purely an Irish story. The Irish themselves, by the way, are very proud of it, and some even believe that there are no equivalents to her in other cultures, which is, of course, nonsense. But to avoid offending the Irish, let's just say that she certainly has her own uniqueness. Banshee is a well-known harbinger of death. When someone in an Irish family is sick, the arrival of the Banshee, or rather her wail or cry, signifies that the person will inevitably die. She foretells death not only from illnesses but also from accidents, although such stories are less common. The word used to describe this spirit is of English origin and means woman from the moans. For those who are not familiar, those are magical hills that separate the worlds. It is understandable that the Banshee had an Irish name, which meant mourning woman or simply a keener. Additionally, there were quite a few local names, but we won't dwell on that and instead try to find out what she looks like. No one can provide an accurate description of the Banshee. One distinguishing feature is that she always appears alone. At least in traditional legends, there is no mention of gatherings of banshees or multiple mystical women mourning one death. Although those who have seen the Banshee constantly contradict each other in their testimonies, several commonly encountered images can be distinguished. The first one is a beautiful young woman with golden hair, always of great height and dressed in beautiful attire. This is how she is portrayed in County Waterford, although these stories are primarily intended for children. In some printed sources, there is information that if the banshee favors a family, she appears as a young beauty, but if not, she is a hideous and grotesque old hag. However, true folk legends do not mention such a characteristic. It is understandable. Who would want to portray the progenitor of their lineage, whom many consider the banshee to be, as ugly? The second image is much more common. It is that of a small elderly woman with long gray hair. This image of an ancestral figure is much more understandable, and old age somehow associates more with the foretelling of death. The stories about the banshee also do not mention any peculiarities of her face. This can easily be explained by the fact that she only appeared at night or at twilight, and her face was covered by long hair. Here is how one eyewitness describes the banshee. I saw her sitting on the kitchen window of Richard Barry's house. She was a small woman, dressed in a long black cloak with bare feet. She had long white hair covering her face. She was combing her hair and occasionally letting out a wail. Richard Barry died 2 days later. Banshees are usually depicted without head coverings, although traditionally, women covered their heads. But there were special exceptions, such as during mourning. So the long flowing hair of the banshee is an integral part of her appearance. Combing the hair is also a common occurrence in the legends, although folklore collectors of the 19th century strangely omitted this detail. However, in the southeast of Ireland, there was a popular legend where a person takes the banshee's comb. I will tell you how it usually ends a little later. Now let's try to delve into the origins of this harbinger of death and determine who she really is. The Irish themselves rarely contemplate the origins of this spirit, considering it unimportant. Nevertheless, there are theories on this matter. As expected, there are several. We can immediately dismiss the version that the banshee is a fairy because mentions of this are rare and mostly found in stories for children. In folk traditions, the idea that banshees are the ghosts of ordinary women takes the forefront. The story of her appearance is often associated with the profession of a keener, a professional mourner, which is quite evident. There's a tradition where when someone from your close ones dies, you hire someone who will cry loudly and dramatically over their grave. According to one version, a keener who fails to fulfill her duties returns to earth and wanders as a restless spirit, continuing her profession. In another version, all the keeners, at the behest of the church authorities in Ireland, turned into banshees after death because they showed false grief, which the Christian church did not approve of. But the most common version of their origin was that banshees are the ghosts of women who were somehow connected to the family whose death they herald. Often, she is considered a deceased member of that particular family. Closely related to this belief is the notion that banshees are the spirits of the very family she announces the approach of death to. Now let's talk separately about the families that are accompanied by banshees. They are usually truly Irish, and accordingly, their surnames should have O or Mac prefixes. However, Viking settlers and Anglo-Normans who settled in Ireland before the 17th century are also considered Irish. Why specifically until the 17th century? Well, precisely because that's when the colonization of Ireland began. Many lands were confiscated from the locals and given to the English for ownership. It is then understandable why banshees only come to the Irish, who are very proud of this heritage. The harbinger of death mainly comes when a male member of the family dies, less frequently a woman, and almost never does the appearance of a banshee signify the death of a child. Perhaps this peculiarity was associated with high infant mortality, and besides, children were not considered full members of the family. In many Irish counties, it is believed that one cannot see a banshee, but her cry can be heard even by the deaf. But here too, there are some caveats. The cry of a banshee is truly supernatural. When it resounds, all other sounds seem to freeze. It doesn't resemble the weeping and lamentations of an ordinary woman. It is much more delicate than a human voice. It is also said to be exceptionally long-lasting. Another interesting aspect is that only those who are meant to hear it can hear the cry, meaning two people can stand side by side, and one of them will hear it while the other won't. Similarly, those who are destined to die do not hear the cry. So if you hear the cry of a banshee, you won't die anytime soon. In authentic folk tradition, it is believed that a banshee's wail consists of indistinct sounds and incoherent exclamations. It is also mentioned that it sounds a specific number of times. Usually, it's 3. Now I will tell the story of County Waterford, where the triple cry of a banshee is mentioned. This happened to my cousin. He was a tailor and worked with my father. He had a habit of visiting neighbors and would not return home before midnight. My father was furious, he threatened him, scolded him, but to no avail. When my father couldn't stop him from wandering at night, he started locking the latch every night. And when poor John knocked on the door, they left him outside until he froze and was ready to tear his hair out in frustration. It certainly didn't make him any smarter, but he began to understand the consequences. So, on that night, he was walking home late, as usual. Just as he reached the mouth of the valley, which led to our house about half a mile away, he heard the most horrifying and monstrous sound anyone had ever heard. The sound whizzed past him towards the house like a bullet, splattering mud from the road onto the bushes, like a winter wind. He was already in the middle of the valley when he heard the roar again. His mind became completely confused, and he ran faster and faster. That sound was so lonely, and there was something strange about it that took his breath away. He was at the door when it squealed again. And when it squealed, John screamed back at it in horrifying fear. He was so terrified that he woke all of us up. At the same time, he started pounding on the door desperately, as hard as he could, until my father angrily got up. However, when he opened the latch, John fell to the floor like a dead man. Oh, what an uproar there was! We thought nothing in the world could help him anymore. But soon he sighed once, and then again. Then we saw him open his eyes and look around. Finally, he spoke, and here's what he said. "Oh, God, have mercy on us. Am I alive or dead?" Gradually, he calmed down, and we squeezed the story out of him about what had happened to him. We told old Thomas Tobin, who lived next to us, about the fear that had come over John. He listened to the whole story without saying a word. And then he said, "That was the banshee. And she came for me. There isn't much time left." And he was right. He died the next day. Great attention is paid to the direction from which the sound comes and where it goes. It is said that it can be heard from all directions. It is impossible to determine the direction from which it comes, or it comes from different sides with extremely short intervals. It never screams twice in the same place. So it's impossible to find the banshee by her voice. We seem to have determined the appearance, functions, and abilities of the banshee. Now we only need to find out what she does when she is not lamenting the deceased members of the family she accompanies. Does she go to another world or stay in ours? Some believe that she remains in the world of the dead, while others were convinced that she roams in the wild places and depicted her as a nature spirit. As we have already found out, the banshee appears in darkness or twilight and enjoys transitional times, such as midnight. The places of her appearance are also indirectly related to boundaries. So she can be seen at a small fence between fields and at stones and streams that were used for crossing or beating laundry. This also connects her to nature spirits. Therefore, like many nature spirits, it is not advisable to offend her, as it may end badly. For example, in one legend, a man mistook the banshee for an ordinary woman and attempted to attack her, for which she left a 5-fingered imprint on his face as punishment. In another legend, 2 men were walking to a wake, right over a bridge where a woman was doing laundry. One of them decided to play a prank and asked her to wash his shirt as well. Laughing, the men continued on their way. When they arrived at the wake, the Joker sat by the door. He didn't even notice when someone took his shirt off him. And when the friends were walking back from the wake over the bridge, someone threw the shirt in his face. It was freshly washed. On one hand, it's a creepy story, but on the other hand, the Banshee washed the man's shirt for free. Another type of legend involves the Banshee's comb. The plot of these stories is similar in many ways, with only a few differences in details, so I will give an example of just one. My father used to tell a story about an old man from the Riggin family who lived here in Killiney many years ago. In those times, they didn't use candles or lamps. Everyone would go to the bog, take a log of bogwood and split it into splinters. They would light them only when they needed to put a pot on the fire or look for something in the house. The rest of the time, they would sit by the fire and tell stories, the turf providing enough light. Well, that old man from the Riggins uprooted a big log of bogwood and carried it home. It was already getting dark outside when he crossed the stream that flows on one side of Carahan. He heard the clatter of a battledore. The man was fearless, not afraid of anything, so he dropped what he was carrying and went straight toward the sound of the battledore. And sure enough, he saw her there. In one hand, she had a battledore, and in the other, a beautiful comb. He sneaked up to her, snatched the comb, and ran home. He ran so fast that not even the March wind could catch him. The Banshee couldn't catch up with him either, but she screamed loudly and horrifyingly behind him. But she still had the battledore in her hand. And as Riggin was approaching his house, she threw the battledore at him. I don't know who saved him, but it missed his head and struck the lintel of the house so hard that it trembled. Riggin, meanwhile, was already closing the door with a bolt. They all sat in the house trembling with fear while the Banshee screamed outside. She demanded that they return her comb or she would destroy their house. There was no choice but to return it. Riggin placed the comb on a shovel and slid it under the door. The Banshee snatched the comb so forcefully that she took half of the shovel's blade with it. And in the morning, the homeowners discovered that the end of the house had split in half where the Banshee's battledore had struck. You can see for yourself if you go and look at the ruins of the Riggin house. Ghosts are ghosts, but not everyone believed in the Banshee. Some people were skeptical about her existence and found perfectly reasonable explanations for her screams. In most cases, the Banshee's cry is just natural sounds. Some sharp observers noted that the Banshee is often heard where cats cry loudly. Others attributed the eerie sounds to the cries of seals, naturally, where they were present. And the most amusing, in my opinion, is the testimony of one of the Irishmen. When foxes mate, they make strange sounds, like whimpering, somewhat resembling a person crying. I remember vividly standing by the road one night, about 10 years ago, and listening to the cries of foxes. When I started walking home a few minutes later, I met an elderly lady, around 70, who was in terrible fear, thinking it was the Banshee. Although I explained to her that it was just foxes crying, I don't think she believed me. In conclusion, the Banshee is a highly respected spirit among the Irish because, in the general tradition, she is one of the ancestors who prepares the way for a person who is about to die. That's all for today. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe not to miss new videos.